Welcome to Novara Live. I'm Michael Walker. It's a Friday afternoon, which means I'm joined by Aaron Bastani. Aaron Bastani, I feel like we're spending so much time together this week.
We are. You're like a brother from another mother, Michael Walker. We've moved my camera around tonight so I can show everybody how well read I am. I can assure you, I've only read about 30% of these books, but it's all the good ones.
You've also got a sons out, guns out situation, showing dads can still lift.
What can I say, Michael? I'm back. My 30s, I wrote them off. I was very fit in my 20s.
Yeah.
Since having a child, I'm really worried that I'm going to die. So I need to be here at least until she's 20. So that's it. BMI down, muscle mass up, cardio up. If I have a heart attack...
Your child has given you a reason to be fit again.
Dare I say, a reason to live, Michael. Of course, Novara Media gave me that. Our Friday night shows gave me that.
Well, when they talk about dad bods, you become a dad, you're looking like an Adonis. Coming up later in the show, more evidence of how dishonest Starmer has been around Pfizer Shaheen. A video has emerged where he has changed his tune. He was speaking very positively about her in 2019. Also, a far-right group, Turning Point UK, have some worrying links to Conservative Party candidates. And Nigel Farage has released a campaign ad that's worth talking about. Aaron Bastani has also written a very interesting report on their manifesto. So I'm going to be talking to Aaron about Reform UK. The plight of renters hasn't been a major theme in this general election, but it did come up in last night's leaders' debate, where Starmer said this.
On the question of rent and mortgages, this is a real, I mean, you're obviously living it, but, young people who are working hard, on a reasonably decent wage, but then having to pay a huge part of it for rent over and over again, because rents are through the roof, the housing isn't what it should be.
Well, there's lots of people who know how bad the problem is. You're asking very specifically, what can be done to help when rents are high, and particularly, will how much you pay in rent go towards being able to buy a property?
Yeah, so on the question of buying property, we want a low deposit scheme, which is what we'll put in place, so that people who've proved they can pay, because they're often paying more for their rent than they pay on their mortgage, so the ability to pay isn't the issue, but they haven't got the ability to save for a mortgage because mum and dad haven't got the money and they're paying it all out on rent. So that's the first thing. The second thing, which is also important for those that are in rented accommodation, is we have to stop the landlords ripping off tenants who are doing, you'll probably be familiar, this bidding war, so that when you go to get a rented property, the landlord just does a bidding war. Who'll pay more, who'll pay more, who'll pay more, until people are paying through the roof. We have to end that.
How will you end that? So how will you end that? If it's private landlords, how can you stop that?
Well, we can pass legislation to say you can't do it, because it is driving rents through the roof, and it's not fair on people. It's taking advantage.
So saying landlords have to, take the lowest bidder? Or, what's the detail of that?
To put the process around how this is, you cannot have a landlord, or this is what we will
I appreciate what you're saying cannot happen, but I'm just wondering specifically, if you've got a private landlord saying, I want to give it to this person or that person, how do you legislate for that not to happen?
No, that's not how they do it. They say, one person says X pounds a week. Someone says, I'll give you X plus £10, £20, £30. They then go back to the first person and say, I've already had better offer for X plus this. Will you out? So you get this bidding war going on until the rents go through the roof.
So you're saying they have to take the first offer. Is that what you're saying for private landlords?
No, we can't have this bidding war like this.
No, I get that. Are you telling private landlords they have to take the first offer then?
We have to have a scheme in place to stop them driving the rent up and up and up.
Okay.
Now, if you were watching our live reaction stream on that Question Time Leaders special last night, you'll know that policy was news to me. It was also unclear to me, like I have to say it was for Fiona Bruce, how that policy would work in practice. So earlier today, I spoke to an expert to find out. Conor O'Shea is Policy and Public Affairs Manager at Generation Rent.
Well, Keir Starmer in that clip is referring to bidding wars, which are the scourge of many renters' lives. I'm sure many renters who are watching this are aware of what he means. The practice basically of where landlords and particularly letting agents encourage bids above the price that the property is offered for and just basically see who can go the highest. So here at Generation Rent, we've heard some absolute horror stories about bidding wars, about people who basically have been thrown in a WhatsApp group with all the other prospective tenants and said, right, biggest number wins. or people going back and forward saying, can you give us 50 quid more a month, 100 quid more a month, just in order to get a roof over your head, the home that you desperately need. So it's a really brutal situation out there, generally for tenants. One of the key things that is making things so miserable is bidding wars, and we are pleased that the Labour Party are taking a stance to try and stop that from happening.
And how would that work in practice? So would it be that sort of when a landlord puts on, Zoopla or Rightmove that the rent for this property is going to be, £3,000 a month, they can't legally accept £3,100 a month? I mean, how do you enforce something like this?
We're not certain on the detail, but we haven't got any sort of absolutes from the policy office that we've seen so far. But that, I think, is broadly what it would look like. The Renters Reform Bill that was going through Parliament in the last Parliament, now the fallen Renters Reform Bill, will be replaced. And within that, there was provisions for a property portal where lots of information would have to be uploaded, including like a landlord register, who owns the property, things like that. That would seem like the natural home, the natural vehicle where we could put that in and say, the amount of rent that's being paid on this property is this, it must be this, it cannot be higher than that, as an enforcement mechanism. But yeah, we're light on the details so far. But ultimately, this is one of the things that renters are really suffering from in the current market. But it would be a sticking plaster. It wouldn't be something that would actually deal with the really brutally high rents that we're seeing. It would just sort of plug one of the many holes that we see.
And when you call it a sticking plaster, what would be the sort of bigger solution? And I suppose concretely as well, if people are sort of looking at this general election, Labour look like they're going to win a majority. Loads of our viewers will be completely sick and tired of how the rental market works. What is Labour offering to your mind that you think people might be able to take some sort of relief from?
Sure, your viewers are not the only ones who are sick and tired of the rental market. I think anybody who's got any experience of it at the moment, renters obviously in particular, just seeing how brutal it is out there for tenants, or for prospective tenants, people who are looking to find a new home. There are some good things in what Labour have offered. There are actually some good things in what everyone have offered. It's not nothing, it's safe to say, that Section 21 no-fault evictions will be banned under all four major parties' manifestos. That's a big win for the tenants' rights movement. It's something that wouldn't have been seen as achievable not that long ago. And now there is absolute consensus across all the major parties that Section 21, draconian, horrible evictions where people can get a letter through the door with just 2 months' notice, telling them they have to leave their home through no fault of their own, they will be a thing of history, in theory, under any government that we see formed. Unfortunately, this was true 5 years ago. The Conservative Party had it in their manifesto and they never managed to get it done. So the proof will be in the pudding on that front, but that's a really positive start. In terms of the Labour Party specifically, there are other things that they're looking at. One of them is house building, and that is going to be an element of getting our way out of this crisis. We don't have enough homes across the board. There's just not enough. So they do need to be built, and they have promised an emphasis on social homes. So that is a good thing. We desperately need more social homes. We need protections from those social homes being sold off. So we particularly like the provision that says that social homes that are newly built cannot be eligible for right to buy, or something along those lines. That's a very positive step. There's one thing that's missing from the party's offers, and that's not just the Labour Party, that's everyone, that would really do something to slam the brakes on these completely ridiculous and unaffordable rent increases that we're seeing. And that is some class of rent stabilisation. Something really logical and simple that makes perfect sense would be just to stop landlords from increasing rent within tenancies above inflation or local wage growth, whichever is the lowest. It's a real common sense measure. It's something that's quite commonplace across Europe. And it's genuinely something that would stop people from being forced from their homes and all of the horrors that come with it as a result of an unfair rent increase. It would basically count as an eviction. If you've been served a rent increase that's 5 times what you're currently paying, you're just going to be unable to pay that. So having some class of logical cap is a really powerful way and a powerful statement that the next government should take to ensure that renters can stop being exploited.
There's not much point in banning no-fault evictions if your landlord, instead of saying you have to leave in 2 months, says, well, you can stay as long as you want, but you'll have to pay double the rent after 2 months, because that is, as you say, sort of a no-fault eviction by any other name. I know at the moment, sort of, especially on Twitter, and I assume actually there is a sort of similar division amongst sort of Labour Party circles. Obviously, I'm asking about the Labour Party because we're kind of assuming they're going to form the next government. So that's sort of who matters the most in this general election campaign. There's these sort of two poles of attraction when it comes to housing debates. There's the YIMBYs who sort of say the only thing that matters, and the thing that matters sort of above all else, is building houses. And then you've got sort of the more neoliberal yimbys who just want to deregulate everything to let the private sector do it. And then you've got people who say, no, the real issue is rent controls. The real issue is renters' protections. I wonder where you at Generation Rent sort of fall within that kind of division, or perhaps you think it's to some degree a false dichotomy.
You've nailed it there at the end. It's absolutely a false dichotomy. And we say this all the time. There's nothing that stops more homes being built in the right places with the right provisions, with extra social homes and everything that comes with that, that would alleviate the crisis in the long term and deal with some of the structural stuff. But there is nothing that can stop that from happening concurrently with proper protections for renters. Because we have 12 million private renters, about 1 in 5 households in the UK now live in a privately rented home. And we have a regulatory framework around that was not designed for that. We're not designed with our housing, with our private renting frameworks, to have people living in it lifelong, as we've seen, or for extended periods of time, as is now relatively normal in the UK. So we need to see some proper protections for renters that exist in Europe as well, that exist in America in some places, that exist in all around the world, just to make sure that those who do live in rented homes, those who, for whatever reason, have the private rented sector as their home, for most of those, or for many of those, there's no choice. It's the only thing they can do. They should be properly protected to do so. And that involves things like, as we've referenced a couple of times, the abolition of Section 21, stopping this sword of Damocles hanging over your head saying, actually, I don't know if in 2 months' time I'm going to be able to send my kid to the same school, or if I'm going to be able to keep this job that I have. So things like that, things like, as we've referenced, rent caps, or in tenancy rent stabilization mechanisms, whatever you want to call them, but stopping the ridiculously high rent increases that we've been seeing across the board. And other things, so the landlord register I referenced earlier, something very simple like knowing who your landlord is and knowing that they could be held accountable is not a right. It's not a thing that exists in the UK at the moment. It does in Wales, it does in Scotland, but it doesn't in England. So that is another fundamental change. And what rental reform should be is a package of measures to protect people who live in privately rented homes, while we also build new homes that first-time buyers can buy, or that can exist as social homes. Those two things are absolutely a false dichotomy. They can be done together.
That was Conor O'Shea from Generation Rent speaking to me earlier today. I have to say, when we were having that conversation, I was thinking, I need something to sort of disagree with so I can spice up this interview a bit more. But I am just so in agreement with this idea that there doesn't need to be a dichotomy between people who want to build more homes and people who want, renters to have more rights, right? If for some of you not on sort of housing policy Twitter, this might all seem a little bit wonky to you, but you have this huge debate where people say, why build more homes? It's got nothing to do with homes. Housing doesn't work via supply and demand. And then you've got people saying any kind of regulation is a waste of time. All you've got to do is build more homes. I think quite clearly we have to build a lot more homes and then make renting a bit more secure for precisely those reasons that Conor O'Shea said there. It's now a housing option that people are, raising families in. You can't have someone raise a family and then say, oh, sorry, I've changed my mind. You're going to have to move out in 2 months now. Maybe you're going to move to a different catchment area and your kid's going to have to change school, right? That's not a way that we can have people living. So we need secure tenancies for people. That does require some form of rent stabilization. And yes, we do need to build shed more homes. Ideally, most of them social homes. Nigel Farage really wants to destroy the Tory party at this election. But what's his actual pitch? This is a video he put out on Thursday.
Life at me's been pretty good. After years of campaigning to leave the European Union, I won. I took on the banks and I beat them. I've been retired from politics, enjoying life living here in the Kent countryside with my wonderful dog, and life is superb. But I've come out of retirement because Britain is broken and Britain needs reform. Nothing works anymore, does it? Nothing works. The health service, travelling anywhere, trying to get your kids or grandkids to get a house, rents have gone through the roof. Nothing actually works. Now, if we had political solutions, I wouldn't mind. But a Conservative government for 14 years has raised our taxes, taken away our freedoms, allowed mass immigration on a scale unthinkable in the history of our nation, and all of our lives have been damaged by it. And as for the Labour Party, well, it's just more of the same. They don't offer any positive solutions. So I'm back in politics, I'm back leading Reform UK, and boy, we're doing well. We really are on the move. We've got momentum behind our campaign. And I'm doing it because I believe in my country. I'm doing it because I believe in values of family, values of community, values actually of country.
Now, obviously, you won't be surprised. I disagree with some of the claims made there. Sort of, he said all of our lives have been destroyed by mass immigration now, or damaged. I don't think he said destroyed, damaged. Now, my life hasn't been damaged by mass immigration. I'm sure someone will say, well, that's because you're a metropolitan elite, right? But I'm not sure what the claim is here. I mean, our social care system, our health service, these things are all being kept afloat by mass immigration. Our university system, in fact, is absolutely being kept afloat by mass immigration, because what we do is we get international students to subsidize the education for people who were born here, right? So people say, oh, they're taking up the university places. Actually, it is international students who are cross-subsidizing British students. So if you cut that off, then, I mean, the university system is fundamentally going to absolutely collapse. I mean, in terms of sort of tone, it was a confident advert, wasn't it? Sort of, he's willing to talk to camera. I'm a fan of dogs. His dog was well behaved. Interesting, he said sort of life is great for me. Now, I think probably sort of some people in the electorate get a little bit frustrated by seeing someone like Keir Starmer or someone like Rishi Sunak sort of saying, yeah, I've had to struggle. I struggled. I didn't have Sky TV. Yeah, my dad was a toolmaker. And no one really believes it, because you look at these people and you think these are people with comfortable lives. Nigel Farage's like, yeah, my life's great, actually. So I wonder if people find that refreshing. I also dispute the idea that he's just come out of retirement, because he had a full-time job hosting a show on GB News where he was making a lot of money. So that's not most people's idea of retirement. Anyway, let's look at the rest of this ad, and then I'm going to go to Aaron for comment.
I see our kids being poisoned through the education system, told we're the worst country that's ever existed in the history of the world. I see our taxation system trapping people on benefits, stopping them effectively from going back to work. I see young people leaving our country. But above all, folks, of all the things that we're proposing, and we want no one to pay tax until they earn £20,000 a year, we want people on benefits to be incentivized to get back to work. But above all, this should be the immigration election. And this is no commentary on anyone that comes. Most of whom do come are really great people that work hard. But our population's risen by 6 million since 2010. We need to put a freeze on migration. We need to leave the European Court of Human Rights so we can stop people crossing the Channel from Dover. We need leaders who believe in Britain. This is a revolt against the political establishment. So on July the 4th, do different. Vote for real change. Vote for a voice in Parliament that will give real opposition. Stand up for the country and stand up for you. Vote Reform UK on July the 4th.
It does seem quite strange sort of saying vote for real change when, I mean, I think even he would agree. He would admit, right, that the prospectus they're putting forward is completely unrealistic. The idea you raise the tax threshold to £20,000, that would cost so much money. That would cost so much money. And by the way, it would give a huge tax break to the wealthy as well, because they wouldn't start paying tax for ages. He wants to raise the top rate of tax to 75k or something like that. So the idea you could do that without the social services he's sort of saying are being strained by immigration completely collapsing. Also, by the way, if you don't want to have so many people coming to this country working in social care, you're going to have to pay people working in social care more to incentivize British people to do it, right? You're not going to be able to do that if you've just completely destroyed the possibility of the Treasury to make money by raising the tax threshold to that degree. Aaron, I want your sort of opinion on the Farage campaign. We saw sort of last week there were big headlines because Reform had overtaken the Conservatives in a YouGov poll. I've just seen sort of just before we went live, the Mirror, one of their polls, has just had Reform overtake the Conservatives. So they are now a force to be reckoned with. I know you were writing this week sort of on their manifesto. What do you sort of make of their campaign so far and the politics they're putting forward?
It's an exceptional campaign. It's an exceptional campaign. I mean, remember that UKIP in 2015 got 3.8 million votes. Look, this is uncharted territory, but I think Reform should be getting significantly more than that. Because, of course, Nigel Farage is a much better known figure. The Tory party is disintegrating. They have far more favourable media coverage, GB News. GB News, of course, would say, well, that's because legacy media is liberal. We're correcting that liberal bias, but whatever. I suppose you could say Talk TV is not there anymore. They would have had a bit more even, but a very different media environment to 2015. And of course, post-Brexit, I think, actually, this is a good thing about Brexit. The BBC, etc., they are far less disposed to what people say in London. They know that there is a bit of a disconnect between parts of the country and other parts of the country, and they tried to correct that. And I think that's absolutely a response to what happened with Brexit, personally. So the media environment's quite different. In terms of the policies, and by the way, that advert was brilliant. Brilliant. You know, his Barber gilet, his black lab, he's in the Kent countryside, lovely day. If you'd never met the man before, he comes across as an affable grandfather. And of course, you have to put yourself in the mind of somebody like that. I have to say as well, doing the Vox Pops I've done recently, all on the blue wall, so not nationally representative, but important from the perspective of who picks up from the collapse in Tory vote, reform is mentioned so frequently. And even people who don't plan to vote say, I like Nigel Farage, I like what he's got to say. So on the substance of the manifesto, that's interesting. And it shows, I think, a real departure from the politics of Farage over the last 15 years, which is effectively Thatcherite. He is a Thatcherite who wanted to leave the European Union and who wanted lower migration. The manifesto now is reflecting, I think, a bit of a break with that. Pardon me, that's my dog. The manifesto is reflecting a bit of a break with that, I think. Firstly, there's the proposed tax on online commerce, big multinationals based online, of 4%, I think, of sales that would pay for the abolition of business rates for small and medium-sized enterprises on the high street. A brilliant policy, Michael, frankly. A left-wing policy. Other policies like forgiving student debt of nurses and doctors after 10 years of service in the NHS. Again, I think a brilliant policy. Very popular, by the way. The Royal College of Nurses did polling on this. 76% of the electorate agrees with the idea that nurses shouldn't have student debt and that debt should be forgiven. So this isn't identikit Thatcherism. There's more besides as well. But those to me were the two really outstanding policies. One more too, and this will really knock people's socks off, I think. And I'm under no illusions, by the way. The average reform voter is not reading the manifesto. They may not even care about this stuff. But I think it matters in terms of the political direction of the right outside the Conservative Party and how it's changing. Nigel Farage and Richard Tice, Michael, have signed off a manifesto which says that 50% of British utilities, energy, rail, and presumably mail and water, 50% of them should be owned by the public, 50%. The other 50% should be owned by UK pension funds. That is remarkable. The idea that natural monopolies, utilities, are 50% owned by the taxpayer is to the left of Keir Starmer. Now, would they do that if they achieved 100 seats or were in government? I don't think that for a moment. But I think it really is indicative of where they know they have to go, where their voters are going. And they weren't there 10, 15 years ago. Even voters on the right, Tory voters, want a bigger role for the state. They don't really trust the market. They don't really trust business. And they think that things like water, rail, mail should be publicly owned. For many years, we've had sort of big house liberal pundits in London say, well, the polls, are very favourable on a policy by policy basis, but when you put it in a manifesto, the public don't like it. Well, Reform have put it in their manifesto. Let's see how they do. These are popular policies. And I feel like actually the London media, the liberal establishment within both the Labour and Tory parties can only hold this back for so long, right? What you're seeing in parts of that manifesto, particularly on public ownership of utilities or 50% equity, is what I call in my most recent article for Novara Media, Gaullism meets GB News. This is Gaullism or French dirigisme with Hunter Welly's characteristics. It's a new shift. It's unprecedented in the British right. And it's not come from the Conservative Party. It's come from Nigel Farage.
And I suppose the question there would be, does it matter? Because I suppose Nigel Farage, I assume, I know you've done more vox popping than me. I haven't done any sort of social scientific polling. But I imagine if you ask people, why are you voting for reform? 9 out of 10 times they say immigration. So sort of, is it not the case that sort of the rest of their policy package is just mere window dressing? They've sort of said, look, we're going to fight this election on migration. Every other policy area, they've just said, well, what's the most popular in the polls? They've said, well, the utilities, people seem to want those nationalised. The tax threshold, people want to pay less tax. Okay, let's get them to pay less tax. When it comes to the high street, people want their high streets restored. Let's sort of make up some policy that will keep that going. They've just sort of done this tick box of let's find out what's most popular because really we just want to be talking about migration the whole time.
I think that's partly true, but I also do think they are trying to eye the coalition they want to build. And so I think, for instance, increasing the threshold that businesses have to pay VAT on, increasing the threshold at which you have to pay corporation tax, scrapping business rates for small and medium-sized businesses on the high street, that is trying to appeal to the petit bourgeois, small business, family capital. Dan Evans, very smart guy, wrote a book about this, interviewed him for Novara Media. He talked about the rise of Trumpism and the success of Trump in 2016 as family capital versus national global capital. I think Farage has spotted a big political gap and he's trying to do the same thing. Remember, of course, as well, he's been on TV for years, right? They have been talking to audiences. They've been getting feedback. They've done live events out in the country. And they have effectively been road testing these policies, Michael. I've been in an audience. I was in Darlington when Rishi Sunak did the GB News event. I was in that audience and I did a show prior to Rishi Sunak being interviewed. And I got a round of applause for saying that actually the big banks were out of control and that the state and the establishment in this country believes in public ownership when it comes to bailing out the banks, but not to bailing out public utilities and bailing out the taxpayer and bailing out the everyman in this country. That got a round of applause from a GB News audience, Michael. These are very popular policies. And I think actually sometimes that's lost on the left. So I think it's partly what you're saying. And let's be real, most of it's window dressing for the big stuff, which is migration. And being to the right of the Tories on, perceived culture war issues, ECHR, et cetera, et cetera. But it's all about migration fundamentally. Even the ECHR is about migration. But I do also feel, Michael, that those like Farage, those like Tice, because they've actually done the media thing for several years now, I reckon they have a really good feel and a really good sense, actually, of where the median conservative voter is, of where the median floating voter is. They certainly know where GB News viewers are at. And that's millions of people. Like I say, the task here is to get a few MPs and to beat the vote that UKIP got in 2015. So they need to get more than one MP and they need to get more than 3.8 million votes. I think that would represent a success. And I think fundamentally they have access to enough data and enough viewpoints to pull that off. Every time I go on GB News, Michael, we've put clips of this. You know this because you've been on there too. Every time I've gone on GB News and we get to talk about public ownership of water, or we get to talk about how actually, the privatization of the Royal Mail was an absolute disgrace, the feedback from their audience is astonishing. And Michelle Dewberry, when I do the show with her, she says that. She says, wow, they really agree with you on this. And again, like I say, I think the left does itself a disservice by failing to admit, strangely, how successful it's been at shaping that agenda. Everybody thinks the banks are corrupt. People really don't trust business and multinationals. By the way, they did 20, 30 years ago. And actually, there is a consensus for public ownership. It might have to be done in a sensible way. I think on rail, for instance, Labour have the right idea of waiting for the franchises to elapse. But if you can do it in a slow, incremental way, which comes across as quote-unquote sensible, pragmatic, moderate, that is absolutely where the public is at.
Let's just, for one moment, focus more on advertising and PR. So Reform have, that was a relatively, could you say it's an innovative advert? It was very simple, but I suppose that many other politicians would be a bit nervous to do it because they wouldn't feel like they sort of had the charisma to pull it off. They've also done another sort of very unusual advert. This is more unusual. This was their party political broadcast. It was on Channel 4. So this is a big moment for a political party because this is basically a big free advert. Ofcom says that the big broadcasters have to give you 5 minutes where you can show whatever you want. And UKIP, Freudian slip, the Reform Party, they put forward just Britain is broken, Britain needs reform. And that was just on a screen for 5 minutes. Nothing changed, nothing moved. As you can see there, if you're listening to the podcast, there's a white text on a black background. Britain is broken, Britain needs reform in blue. So I think the idea was that if you turned on your TV, no sound as well. If you turn on your TV, you think, is my TV broken? And then you go on Twitter and then you realize, everyone's talking about this innovative advert on Twitter. Aaron, do you have a better idea of Reform's end game? Do you think Farage wants to join the Conservative Party? Do you think they're going to go and do you think they want to replace the Conservative Party? What's going on? Do you think he just wants to sort of go back to GB News with more stature than he left?
Well, I think status is certainly a big part of it. I think he's probably very happy the general election will be done by July the 4th because he can fly straight over to the US. By the way, that's a massive deal, Michael. If he's an MP, and let's say they get 3 MPs, I think two is what they're looking at fundamentally, but look, we have no idea, right? They could get dozens. I don't think so, but let's say 2 or 3. For him to fly over as an MP and then support Trump in the presidential race over there. I mean, they're on the pitch, mate. They are really, the radical right in this country are on the pitch. Doesn't mean they're winning, because Labour are about to win a historic majority by the looks of things, but they're on the pitch. And the radical left, let's be honest, isn't. And that would be a remarkable achievement. So in terms of what they want, I think it really does depend on what day of the week it is. When I've spoken to people like Ben Habib, who's a senior figure in reform, he says, I want to destroy the Conservative Party. They hate the Conservative Party more than, say, Keir Starmer does. They pathologically hate the Conservative Party because, of course, many of them are former Conservative Party members, right? It's like many people on the left who are Corbyn supporters, they now hate Labour. They hate Labour, and lots of normal normies who are Labour voters or whatever, just like, this is kind of weird. They don't get it because these people were so invested in that project for so long. They saw firsthand how horrible and vile it could be. So it's a similar experience, I think. I've got an interview coming out of Peter Oborne on Sunday, and he talks about how he thinks the Conservative Party is finished, but there still will be a fight for the title deeds because, of course, this is a big political brand. To use corporate terminology, the intellectual property is very valuable. That logo and the name is still going to get millions of votes. And I think, in an ideal world for Farage, his allies would take over the Tory party and Reform would grow at the same time. And maybe in 5 years' time, you might have some kind of pact. But I don't think he's going to renounce the Reform brand anytime soon. I don't think he's tried to get into Parliament 7 times. I don't think when he finally does it, if he does it, you've got Ipsos and I think Salvation showing him winning Clacton by quite a margin. If they're right, that's a big deal. I don't think he's going to win at the 7th or 8th time of asking and then suddenly fold that political party. So I think Reform will be a distinct political organisation from the Tories. I think he'll create more chaos for the Tories after July the 4th during their leadership election. That's what he does. He creates chaos, often to his own political advantage. And I think they'll build the Reform brand. 2029, the next election after that, is a different question altogether. But I personally, and again, famous last words, I can't see him joining the Conservative Party just after they've experienced their worst ever defeat, probably worse than 1906, and he's just won his first seat. It depends. I genuinely think Reform might actually, I don't think they'll get a higher percentage of the vote. I could, again, be wrong, famous last words. I think they'll probably be like the SDP in the 1983 election, have a great campaign, but still perform behind the Tories, just like the SDP did with Labour. But if they're 2 or 3 million votes behind the Tories, I don't think he's going to jump ship, no. I think they'll actually start to build a serious political organisation. And finally, Michael, the really important point of all of this is that if you're an ambitious young person on the British right, who are you looking to imitate right now? It ain't Rishi Sunak. You're looking at Europe, you're looking at people like Meloni, you're looking at Le Pen, and now you're looking at Farage here, and you're thinking, well, I want to be like those guys. People talk about Le Pen and the rise of the French far right. Actually, the rising star of the French far right is a guy called Bardella, a younger guy in his early 30s. Who are the Bardellas who are going to come in the slipstream of Farage and Reform? If Reform get 2 or 3 MPs and they get 20% of the vote, 15% of the vote, who are the Bardellas? Who's that next generation of politicians, activists, journalists on the British political right who don't like the Tories? Because it's going to be quite big. And that, to me, in a way, is actually the bigger story than Farage.
Marco Longhi is defending a majority of 11,000 as the Conservative Party candidate for Dudley North. He is therefore quite likely to lose his seat, and he's resorted to playing very dirty. Longhi is up against a Labour candidate of Indian origin, a fact which he is unashamedly trying to exploit. So this is a letter he sent out to constituents of a certain ethnicity. So he says, voters of the British Pakistani Kashmiri community in Dudley. Dear resident, first of all, a very happy Eid to you and your entire family. Recently, we have seen Modi's BJP being re-elected in India. This means it will be even tougher times for people of Kashmir in the coming months. Narendra Modi made it clear recently that he is going for a full statehood for Kashmir, which would mean full removal of any sovereign rights of the Kashmiris and their special status. I was elected as your MP in 2019, and since my election, I have been at the forefront of speaking against the Indian government atrocities towards the people of Kashmir. My involvement is well publicised, and I have participated in several Kashmir events. I have always condemned India's continuous illegal actions in Kashmir. Now, so far, this letter might seem fair enough, right? I don't actually really disagree with anything he said there. Narendra Modi, his leadership will create a risk for Kashmiris in India. But what happens next is very cynical. That's because he asks who his constituents will think will speak up for Kashmir in Parliament, and then says, will it be me or Labour's Sonia Kumar? Now, you'll see nowhere in this slide does Longi state Kumar's actual position on Kashmir, but he does put her surname, in capitals and underline it, right? And why has he done that? Well, because Kumar is a famous Hindu name, right? And Longi is transparently saying, don't vote for this Hindu. Labour has called the letter, quote, clearly inappropriate, divisive dog whistle politics. Longi is no stranger to divisive dog whistle politics. In May this year, he announced in the House of Commons that he had banned asylum seeker cases from his surgery. He said this was in order to put, quote, Dudley people first. And Longi is also a main character in an expose written by Simon Childs for Novara Media this week. The article is about the links between the far-right group Turning Point UK and the Conservatives. Foremost among the Conservatives with those links is Marco Longi, who has since 2022 been the honorary president of Turning Point UK. So, who are Turning Point UK or TPUK? Well, the group is a spin-off of the Turning Point group from America. They were set up to fight the left on college campuses with figures such as Charlie Kirk and Candace Owens as sort of famous faces associated with the group. But the group also has a more violent side, perhaps. An investigation by anti-fascist research group Red Flare, shared with Novara Media, reveals the group's links to violent far-right street protests. Turning Point UK organises protests with its Direct Action group. On its website, it boasts TPUK's Direct Action team achieves national coverage through our protest movement standing up to the far left in our land. On WhatsApp, the group description says it is the elite action team engaging in pop-up protests against the woke mob, radical lefties, grooming of innocents, and illegal immigration. We lead the charge in taking our culture back. I don't know what grooming of innocence means. I think that's probably a kind of homophobic, transphobic type thing, because as you'll see later, these are the kind of people who sort of protest outside LGBT events, calling everyone inside a paedophile or a groomer or whatever. So already unpleasant enough. But evidence suggests that members of the group don't only intend to achieve these suspect aims by peaceful means. So leaked WhatsApp messages show a member of the Direct Action group offering to sell knuckle dusters ahead of the 28th of October, when the group planned to oppose a national march for Palestine. It also shows that members of the Direct Action group use the icons of far-right groups which have been involved in street violence, such as the Pie and Mash Squad, the South East Division, and far-right group the Patriots of Britain. This is all very worrying, especially as Turning Point UK has links with the Tory party beyond Marco Longi. Now, here is the leader of TP UK. He's called Jack Ross. He was an admin on those WhatsApp groups, so the one with knuckle dusters for sale. And here he's in a rather different guise, attending the state opening of Parliament with Dr. Liam Fox MP. Ross was a Conservative Party candidate at the local elections in May 2023 and has met a number of high-profile Tory MPs. He has done so in part through his work with his parents' disability charity and through his work as a researcher for the Bow Group, that's the world's oldest conservative think tank. And he seems to collect photos of high-profile Tories like Pokemon cards. He is one with Penny Mordaunt at the Royal Albert Hall. Meanwhile, a number of Tory MPs appear to have no problem being seen with TP UK. Jacob Rees-Mogg, Desmond Swain, Lee Anderson, who was then still a Tory, as well as Reform UK leader Nigel Farage, all appeared in a video from the 2023 Conservative Party conference, chuckling, along as another TP UK leader, Nick Tenconi, asked them how many genders there are. That sentiment was echoed by the group on the Trans Day of Remembrance. That's a day to memorialise those murdered as a result of transphobia. TP UK marked it by sharing a social media graphic to remember that there are only two genders. That's on the Transgender Day of Remembrance for people who've been murdered, right? These views are of the kind that motivated TP UK to organise a series of homophobic protests against drag story hours in South London. Those protests turned violent, and they were against age-appropriate events which the group claimed were, in fact, a sinister exercise in grooming children. In Parliament, Lewisham MP Vicky Foxcroft asked Prime Minister Rishi Sunak to condemn TP UK's attempt to spread hatred and division. Sunak did not address the incidents in question, stating only that people should be allowed to gather and associate freely within the bounds of the law. And for his part, Marco Longi has in the past tried to distance himself from the group, of which he is the honorary president. He told the Parliamentary Commissioner for Standards this: I was approached by TP UK to see if I would become their honorary president. This was done over a meeting I believe I had with them at some point here in London over the shake of a hand. He said, I've never since engaged with them. I do not attend any of their meetings, any of their deliberations. I have no part in their AGMs or anything like that. There is zero remuneration. There is zero influence, them on me or me on them. On September the 13th, 2023, so just 2 months before he was talking to the Parliamentary Standards Committee, Turning Point UK say, great to see our president, Marco Longi, today in Parliament. Marco is a true bastion of conservatism. And then they're all posing together. Aaron, sort of detailed story here, sort of showing the relationships between a Tory MP, a very sinister letter, I think, and then also what seems like a fairly sinister group. And I suppose the question I wanted to put to you is, as we've sort of seen the rise of a far right around the world, we've had the Tories in government for 14 years. And, I think one can probably speculate that parties get a little bit weirder in opposition. And do you think that sort of with Labour entering government, as we presume is going to happen in 2.5 weeks' time, that it will be the case that the Conservatives get really weird, kind of go off the deep end a little bit?
Well, I don't know if that's true about the weirder in opposition thing. I think sort of Trump, I know it's a presidential system, but Trump definitely got weirder the longer he was in.
But the Republicans got Trump when they were in opposition, if you see what I mean. So the Republican Party only became Trumpian in opposition.
True. I buy your point, but I think you can get weirder in office because of objective, conditions like changes in social media consumption or a crisis or a war. But generally speaking, of course, you're right. There are high incentives to try new things, reach out to different audiences, try new technologies, leverage different media when you're in opposition, right? And of course, intellectually, you're going to be dragged all over the place, just naturally. When you're in government, when you're in office, it's different. I think that's true, what you're saying. And it's a really interesting point, right? Because the Tories, like you say, have been in government for 14 years and have got incredibly weird. I suppose you could say, well, no, they've got Rishi Sunak as PM, they've got David Cameron as Foreign Secretary, and that is very much the Conservative Party establishment trying to not be weird, trying to pretend that none of this is happening. And of course, it is happening. The British centre-right has effectively collapsed. It's collapsed since Brexit. Actually, the main part of the British centre-right right now, my argument would be, is in the Labour Party and the Liberal Democrats. Some of it is still with the Conservative Party, of course, but it's certainly not the home of them anymore. And when I talk to people on the right, to Conservatives, when I talk to people, Peter Oborne, I suppose you wouldn't even say he's on the right anymore. He voted Labour in 2019. But when I talk to people like Peter Oborne, Peter Hitchens, they say that the small town provincial lawyer, solicitor who used to read the Daily Telegraph, they would say that person's gone. They just don't exist anymore. They do not exist. And that is why, for Peter Oborne, a paper like the Telegraph, for instance, this is the house paper of a party that's been in power for 14 years, is insane. The Telegraph has become completely deranged and insane. And I think that gives you a snapshot of the wider changes which this story also underscores. I do think that there will be a battle for the Conservative Party in opposition, and I think almost certainly the insane faction, the wacky, whatever you want to call it, the non-David Cameron faction, the non-Penny Mordaunt faction will win, because their core vote, the coalition they had, has effectively collapsed. Now, you might say, well, why is it collapsed? I would say, if you have an economy which doesn't grow for the best part of 2 decades, if you have the sort of disintegration of small and medium-sized businesses, if you have effectively US, primarily digital multinationals, terrorizing your economy, particularly Amazon, then something significant is going to happen. So I think that model of the Conservative Party, centre-right, Cameronism, basically will be like Blair with less public spending. That's what they wanted to be until 2007. that's died because it was built on a certain kind of growth model, which we haven't had for a very long time. Now, low growth means that centre-right politics can't work, it can't prevail because you're not offering enough people, enough things, enough of the time. They masked that for a pretty long time with low interest rates and, of course, looking after pensioners. That itself is obviously what has run out of road, right? It's the increase in interest rates which has really killed the Conservative Party more than anything else, and the cost of living crisis over the last 2 years. So the economic and political foundation of their vote has disappeared, and they need to determine what kind of party they want to be. And it's going to be very hard because they are still committed to a growth model, free market economics, which doesn't deliver rising living standards for most people. They're still committed to things like outsourcing, which means that most high streets look like utter dog shit because councils can't maintain them properly. They are committed to selling off British companies to the US without, thinking about it, whereas the French or the Germans wouldn't do that, including strategically important businesses like ARM. So that centre-right tendency of the party is so out of kilter with the economic realities of the 2020s that it's hard for anybody but the crazies to win, right? And I think they will do. I think they will do. I think you will see a very strange turn in the Conservative Party. However, I suppose you could say that maybe if Reform do really well, actually all of those tendencies, all those individuals, all that intellectual kind of ferment would actually sit in Reform, and maybe the Conservative Party would be happy just to be a smallish party of 100 people, just Cameronism, and okay, let those guys get on with it. We'll be small for a decade or something, maybe. I mean, I really do doubt it. I really do doubt it. You just don't meet core Tory votes anymore. They literally don't exist. I've done multiple videos now in the blue wall. They don't exist. They've disappeared. They're Lib Dem curious, or they're not voting, or they're going to Reform, or they're going to Labour. Some are even going to the Greens. They don't exist. It's a real existential crisis for them. And I think, frankly, the likelihood is that, yes, the crazies will be the ones that take up the corpse.
At Thursday's BBC Question Time event, Keir Starmer took heat for his dishonesty about Jeremy Corbyn.
You said he would make a great Prime Minister. Did you mean it, or did you have your fingers crossed behind your back?
Look, I didn't think we would win that election.
You said that, but irrespective of that, you said he'd make a great Prime Minister. Did you mean it?
It wasn't a question that really arose because I didn't think we were going to win the election. And now,
but we all heard you. We all heard you saying he would be a great Prime Minister. That was your way of telling the people here, vote for him. Did you not mean that?
I was campaigning for the Labour Party. And I'm glad I did.
But you also campaigned for Jeremy Corbyn to be Prime Minister.
Campaigning for the Labour Party. I was a Labour politician. I wanted to be elected or re-elected, and I wanted good colleagues to be re-elected.
Just answer this.
Some of the people around the shadow cabinet table were people whose seats were saved because we campaigned hard for the Labour Party.
Just answer this, yes or no. When you said Jeremy Corbyn would make a good Prime Minister, did you mean it?
Look, he would be a better Prime Minister. Well, look what we got, Boris Johnson. A man who made massive promises, didn't keep them, and then had to leave Parliament in disgrace.
Did you think he'd make a great, not even just a great Prime Minister?
I didn't think we were in a position to win that election. And the more I look at the preparation we've now done...
That's not an answer.
The more I look at the preparation we've now done, the more convinced I am about that.
Emma, where are you? What do you think of that?
I'm not convinced. It leaves me with the same question about integrity and trust that I had with the clown called Boris Johnson. And also,
now, don't hold back, Emma, obviously.
I would like to vote for someone that I can trust.
She would like to vote for someone she can trust. Well, can you trust Keir Starmer? Well, it's pretty clear that it's not just Corbyn who's been a victim of Starmer's dramatic U-turns. Now, exclusive footage shared with Novara Media shows how Keir Starmer spoke about Faiza Shaheen in 2019.
Thank you all so much for coming in. Can I just start by saying how brilliant Faiza is? You've got a fantastic candidate here. I've spoken with Faiza on platforms across the country, and she's always brilliant. And she came to my constituency Labour Party a few months ago and lit up the whole room. We had at least 150 people in that room. The whole bottom room was filled, and we had the galleries at the top filled as well. Faiza was there talking to them, inspiring them, and taking their questions. And all of our constituency members and supporters. We're so thrilled to hear you. And it's really, really great for me to be here to support Pfizer in her campaign because we want her in Parliament. Yeah. What she's doing is so brilliant. We want her in Parliament. That is a massive plus. And it's a double plus because we get rid of IDS at the same time.
You heard there. Faiza Shaheen, she's brilliant. She's fantastic. She's got a local vision and a national vision. I cannot wait to get this woman elected. You also saw sort of Faiza Shaheen sort of sitting in that seat. She's looking at Keir Starmer. She's saying, oh, how lovely to have this man say such nice things about me. 5 years later, Faiza Shaheen blocked by the Labour Party. And to explain why she was blocked, this is what Keir Starmer said to TV cameras.
Are you blocking left-wing candidates from standing in this election?
No. I've said repeatedly over the last 2 years as we've selected our candidates that I want the highest quality candidates. That's been the position for a very long time.
So, Aaron, obviously we've seen that clip of Keir Starmer before saying he wants the highest quality candidates, implying that Faiza Shaheen is a low quality candidate, essentially. What's new is this video of him saying that she's pretty much the best candidate he could have possibly imagined. Like, I've never seen a more enthusiastic speech about a political candidate than Keir Starmer talking about Faiza Shaheen. Suddenly, 5 years later, oh yeah, she's just not high quality, really. Doesn't make the grade.
He lies more than any politician in recent British history, including Boris Johnson. His definition of the truth is what he said. Okay, so what he said that several years ago was true because he was saying it, and what he's saying now is also true because he's saying it. I really believe this, Michael. I think the man has a problem. I honestly believe the man, and people are like, don't go personal, Aaron. I honestly believe he has some kind of psychological disorder. That level of dissonance between what he said then and what he said now, and how he can say it with a straight face, is extraordinary. I've not ever seen it before, Michael. I've honestly not ever seen it before. It is absolutely extraordinary. And of course, Faiza Shaheen is a great candidate. Economics PhD, worked in think tanks, worked overseas. You know, you've got her and her husband there. They've got a new kid now. I mean, of course it's vacuous, but that stuff matters in politics. Young family, telegenic. I was just thinking how handsome her husband is. You know, stupid point to make. But the idea that she's not like, quote unquote, especially in the TV age, an ideal political candidate, then there's her CV, then there's the quality of her policies. Great public speaker. I mean, she's clear. She's like an identikit great political candidate in the 2020s. She's kind of like AOC or something. And I think personally, that's why she was blocked. That's my personal view. It's not that she was a bad candidate. It's that she was too good. She would have created a different pole of attraction in the Labour Party because of her credibility, intellectually, academically, and because of her ability to command an audience. He said that when she spoke at his CLP, there was 150 people there. How many people were there watching Keir Starmer? 10, 15? There you go. Bit of box office, bit of gold dust. No, thank you. That's why she's not there. I really think, Michael, and I've actually had this put to me by people on the right, I really think we're in unprecedented waters with Keir Starmer. Somebody put it to me. They said, look, Keir Starmer, for all I know, may be to the left of you, i.e. me, may be to the left of Aaron from Novara Media in office, or he may be to the right of Tony Blair. I honestly have no idea. And they're probably right, you know? And by the way, for that person, Britain rejoining, say, the single market is coded as left. And I don't think we should rejoin the single market in the next parliament. Customs union, fine. I think that's true. I genuinely think that's true. And we've never been in a situation before where a prime minister, regardless of the majority he gets, we have no idea where he's going to sit. And I think that's partly a failure of the media. But I do also think it's partly a consequence of the man. He has this tremendous capacity for lying and misrepresentation, which, like I say, we've never really had in politics in this country before. And we need to think about immune and defense mechanisms to stop it from happening again. We should not be in a situation where somebody can get such extraordinary power and the electorate not really know what they stand for. And like I say, that's an indictment on the media. But I also think it's a reflection of who he is and how unique his capacity for lying is. I mean, this is embarrassing. The average person would be cringing watching that, but he's shameless. He doesn't care. He has no problem at all with it.
Hopefully, Pfizer can still become sort of a pole of attraction, not within the Labour Party, but within Parliament. She's, of course, standing as an independent. As I understand it, she thinks the election could be somewhat close, looking for more people to canvass for her. So if you're looking for someone whose door you can knock on, you've got Jeremy Corbyn in Islington North, you've got the Green Party everywhere, you've got some decent Labour candidates, and you've got Pfizer Shaheen in Chingford North, if you're looking for something to do this weekend. Let's wrap up there. Thank you, Aaron, for joining me on tonight's show. Before we finish, though, can you tell us about this weekend's Downstream? You have mentioned it already. Peter Oborne, I understand.
We are on a tremendous run when it comes to Downstream interviews. We had Mick Lynch. We had Peter Oborne, of course, coming out this week. And last week, we had an amazing one with Ilan Pappé on the history of Zionism and the Israel lobby. Peter Oborne, I think, is absolutely up there with that one. And, of course, Angus Hansen too. We've had great numbers on all those interviews. I think Oborne will be just as good. We're talking really about the collapse, the demise of the Conservative Party. In Peter's view, this is the most important general election since 1929. Why? We hear this all the time. Because the winning party, the default party of government since the Great Reform Act of 1832, that party, he thinks, is gone and it's not coming back.
Interesting. That'll be out on our channel this Sunday at 3 p.m. For now, thank you everyone for watching. Have a great weekend. And we'll be back on Monday at 6 p.m.